The gravel drive leading up to Harrowgate wound through the forest like a scar, choked on both sides by ancient pines that seemed to lean inward, interlocking their branches to blot out the moonlight. The high beams of Arthur's battered sedan cut a frantic path through the gloom, illuminating moths the size of fists. Okay, just a little further, Arthur muttered, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles were white. He swerved to avoid a rut that looked deep enough to swallow a tire. Look at the architecture, guys. That's genuine Gothic revival. Look at the turmoil in that roofline. Arthur, if you look at the roofline, we are going to die in a ditch, Shelly said from the back seat. She didn't look up from her phone, though the screen had 0 bars of service. She clicked the side button, darkening the glass, and stared at her own reflection. Her jaw was set tight. And it's not turmoil. It's water damage waiting to happen. Samantha sat in the passenger seat, her forehead resting against the cold window glass. She wasn't looking at the roof. She was looking at the 3rd floor window, the one where the glass rippled like frozen water. For a second, just as the headlights swept across the facade, she thought she saw the darkness behind the pane shift, recoiling from the light. It's big, Samantha said, her voice quiet. Grandma wasn't kidding about the palatial part. It's a money pit with a zip code, Shelly countered, though she leaned forward as the car lurched to a halt. Harrowgate loomed. It was a monstrous thing of dark stone and slate, rising out of the earth as if it had grown there like a tumor. The original structure, the bones of the place, dated back to the Revolution. Sure, a field hospital where limbs were sawed off by candlelight. Later, it was a station for the fleeing, a place of held breath and terror under the floorboards. The Victorians had simply dressed the trauma in velvet and mahogany. Arthur killed the engine. The silence that followed was immediate and suffocating. The woods didn't chirp or rustle. They just waited. Home sweet home, Arthur announced, cracking the door open. He stepped out, caught the toe of his sneaker on a protruding root, and stumbled hard, barely catching himself on the hood. I meant to do that. Stretching the calves, graceful as a gazelle, Shelly drawled, stepping out into the chill air. She pulled her coat tighter. It's freezing. It's August. Why is it freezing? Samantha stepped out slowly. The air smelled of wet earth, pine needles, and something fainter copper and stale ash. She walked to the massive oak front doors. The iron knocker was shaped like a lion's head, its eyes rubbed smooth by centuries of hands. Do you have the key, Sam? Arthur asked, wrestling 3 suitcases out of the trunk at once. Samantha dug into her pocket and pulled out the heavy iron skeleton key. It felt greasy, cold enough to burn her skin. She slid it into the lock. The mechanism ground against itself, a sound like teeth gritting, before finally clicking. With a heavy groan, the door swung inward. The foyer was a cavern of shadow. The air inside was stagnant, preserved, as if the house had been holding its breath for decades. Arthur fumbled for a light switch, his hand slapping indiscriminately against the wainscoting. "Let there be light," he proclaimed. A chandelier overhead flickered, the bulbs buzzing angrily, casting a sickly yellow pallor over the dust motes dancing in the air. The light didn't reach the corners of the room. The shadows there seemed thick, gelatinous. "Well," Samantha said, stepping into the center of the hall. She spun in a slow circle. "It certainly has personality. It smells like wet dog and history books," Shelly noted, running a finger along a side table. She inspected the grime on her fingertip. "Thick history books. The boring kind. I think it's majestic," Arthur said, marching past them towards the grand staircase. "Imagine the parties, the balls. I bet George Washington slept here." "George Washington slept everywhere, Arthur. He had narcolepsy," Samantha said, forcing a smile. She watched him ascend the first few steps. The wood groaned under his weight, a sound that echoed too long, vibrating in the floorboards beneath Samantha's feet. "Wait," Shelly said, freezing. Arthur stopped, mid-step. "What? Did you hear that?" "Hear what? The floor?" Arthur asked. "No," Shelly said, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the darkness at the top of the stairs. "A door closing. Upstairs. Drafts," Arthur dismissed, waving a hand. "Old houses breathe. It's thermal expansion." "Thermal expansion doesn't sound like a latch clicking," Shelly muttered. Samantha didn't speak. She was looking at the hallway to the left, which led towards the old library and the servants' quarters. The temperature dropped sharply where she stood. The hair on her arms stood up, not from cold, but from static. She felt a pressure in her ears, the kind you feel when diving too deep underwater. "Get out!" a thought whispered in her mind. It wasn't her own voice. "Sam?" Shelly's voice snapped her back. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Or Arthur's credit score." Samantha blinked, the pressure receding. She laughed, though it sounded brittle. "I'm fine. Just big, empty house. Spooking myself." "Well, I'm claiming the master bedroom," Arthur shouted, charging up the rest of the stairs. His heavy footsteps thudded away, fading into the gloom of the second floor. "He's going to fall through a floorboard," Shelly sighed, picking up her bag. "I give him 20 minutes before he breaks a hip." "Shelly," Samantha said softly. "Yeah? Did Grandma ever say why she never lived here? Why she just kept it?" Shelly paused, looking at the peeling wallpaper, the dark portraits of stern-faced men that lined the walls. Their eyes seemed to track the movement of the dust. "She said it didn't like people," Shelly said, shifting her grip on her bag. "But she was senile and drank gin for breakfast. Come on, let's find a room with a lock." Shelly marched up the stairs after Arthur. Samantha remained in the foyer for a moment longer. She looked down at the floorboards. Faint scratches marred the wood, dragging marks leading from the front door toward the darkness of the cellar entrance under the stairs. Above her, the chandelier buzzed, and for a split second, the light died completely. In that heartbeat of absolute blackness, Samantha heard it, distinct, wet, and far too close to her ear. A sharp intake of breath. The light flickered back on. The foyer was empty. "Coming!" Samantha yelled, her voice cracking. She grabbed her bag and ran for the stairs, refusing to look back at the dark, open mouth of the cellar door. The master bedroom was a cavernous space, dominated by a 4-poster bed that looked more like a sacrificial altar than furniture. The velvet canopy was thick with dust, heavy enough to smother. Despite the room's grandeur, Shelly had insisted on dragging the rusted roll-away cot from the servants' quarters into the center of the room. It squeaked a metal protest with every inch. "This is ridiculous," Shelly said, shoving the cot against the foot of the master bed. "We are grown adults. We have 15 bedrooms, and we have 0 working locks, and a house that sounds like it's digesting itself," Arthur pointed out, bouncing experimentally on the master mattress. A plume of dust erupted, making him cough. "Besides, it's a slumber party. We can braid each other's hair. I'll start with yours, Shells." "Touch my hair and you lose a finger," Shelly muttered, though she didn't move the cot back out. She sat on the edge, the springs groaning. "Fine. But if you snore, I'm smothering you with a pillow. That's a legally binding contract." "I don't snore," Arthur said, lying down and immediately sinking 6 inches into the soft, ancient mattress. "I purr. Like a jungle cat." Samantha climbed in next to him, pulling the heavy quilt up to her chin. The fabric was cold, draining the heat from her body. "Lights out, jungle cat." Arthur clicked the lamp. Darkness didn't just fill the room. It rushed in, absolute and heavy. The only light came from the red digits of Arthur's travel alarm clock. 11:15 p.m. Sleep came in fitful, shallow waves. The house settled around them, the timbers contracting in the cooling night air like arthritic joints popping. At 3:33 a.m., the silence broke. It wasn't a noise that woke Shelly. It was the temperature. The air around her cot had plunged to a freezing point that made her teeth ache. Her eyes snapped open, staring blindly into the pitch black. She couldn't move. Her limbs felt leaden, pinned by an invisible weight pressing down on her chest. Then, the touch, something wet and impossibly cold, slid across her cheek. It felt like raw meat left in a freezer slick, firm, and dead. It traced the line of her jaw, lingering near her ear. Adrenaline spiked through Shelly's system, shattering the paralysis. With a guttural gasp, she lashed out, her hand swinging wildly in the dark. Slap! Her palm connected with something. It wasn't air. It felt like taut, cold skin over hard bone. The sensation was revoltingly solid. "Get off!" Shelly screamed, the sound tearing her throat. She scrambled backward, the cot tipping precariously. Her hand flailed for the nightstand, knocking over a glass of water, before her fingers closed around the heavy metal flashlight she'd placed there. "What? What is it?" Arthur shouted, his voice thick with sleep. The bed spring shrieked as he bolted upright. Shelly thumbed the switch. The beam cut through the darkness like a physical blade. She swept it across the room, the wardrobe, the vanity, the empty corners. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. "Shelly?" Samantha was sitting up, clutching Arthur's arm, her eyes wide and glassy. Shelly swung the light toward the bed. For a fraction of a second, the beam caught the wall behind the headboard. A shadow, tall, spindly, and wrong seemed to detach itself from the dark oak paneling. It didn't fade. It scuttled upward, vanishing into the gloom of the vaulted ceiling. "There," Shelly gasped, pointing the light at the spot. Something touched me." Arthur tumbled out of bed, grabbing a fireplace poker from the hearth. He looked ridiculous in his boxers, wielding the iron rod like a broadsword, but his face was pale. "Where? I don't see anything." "It was right here," Shelly said, her voice trembling. She rubbed her cheek. It still felt cold, a lingering oily sensation that made her skin crawl. "I hit it. I swear to God, I hit it." Samantha leaned forward, sniffing the air, her nose wrinkled. "Do you smell that?" It drifted over them, a cloying, sweet stench of spoiled pork and old copper. It was faint, but unmistakable. The smell of something that had been dead for a long time. "Dead mouse in the walls," Arthur suggested, though he didn't lower the poker. He did a perimeter sweep, checking under the bed and opening the wardrobe. Nothing but dust bunnies and moth-eaten coats. "It wasn't a mouse," Shelly whispered, gripping the flashlight until her knuckles turned white. They sat in the silence for a long time. The smell slowly dissipated, replaced by the musty scent of the old house. Eventually, exhaustion won out. Arthur kept the poker on the nightstand. Shelly didn't turn off the flashlight, setting it on the floor so it cast a long, diffused beam across the ceiling. They slept, but it was the sleep of the prey light, twitching and full of dread. Morning arrived grey and weeping. Rain lashed against the tall windows, blurring the view of the encroaching woods. Samantha stood in the bathroom connected to the master suite. The porcelain tiles were cracked, veins of black mold running through the grout like a disease. She turned the faucet handle. The pipes groaned, a metallic screech that vibrated through the floor before spitting out a stream of brown, then clear water. She stepped in. The water was frigid. There was no hot water, despite Arthur's tinkering with the boiler earlier. She gasped as the icy spray hit her skin, but she didn't step out. She needed to wash the feeling of the night away. She scrubbed her arms, her neck, her face, trying to feel clean. She turned to rinse the soap from her legs and stopped. On her left calf, stark against her pale skin, was a bruise. It was a deep, violaceous purple, fresh and angry. Samantha crouched down, the cold water drumming on her back, to look closer. Her breath hitched. It wasn't a bump from a suitcase. It wasn't a knock against a table. The mark consisted of two distinct, oval pressure points, spaced unnaturally far apart, with a long, thin streak trailing upward from each. It looked exactly like the grip of a hand, but a hand with only 2 fingers, each one 6 inches, long and impossibly slender. She reached out to touch it, and a jolt of pain shot up her leg, deep in the muscle. It felt as if the fingers were still there, squeezing, claiming her. Samantha shut the water off with a violent twist of the handle. The pipes shuddered, a deep clanging that echoed in the walls like a hammer striking an anvil, before falling silent. She stood in the porcelain tub, her breath pluming in the frigid air. Her skin was pebbled with gooseflesh, violently shivering. But the cold wasn't the only reason she felt numb. She stared down at her calf, water droplets racing over the angry purple discoloration. "It's just a bruise," she told herself, forcing her lungs to expand, to take in the damp, moldy air. "You're clumsy. You've always been clumsy." She stepped out onto the threadbare bath mat, snatching a towel from the rack. She rubbed her skin raw, trying to generate friction, trying to scrub away the memory of the shape. It was the bed frame. It had to be. That monstrosity of a bed had sharp, carved corners. She must have thrashed in her sleep when Shelly screamed, kicked the mahogany post, and not felt it until now. Paranoia, she whispered, the word hanging unsupported in the silence. Just pure, sleep-deprived paranoia. She pulled on her jeans quickly, wincing as the denim scraped over the tender skin. Covering it helped. If she couldn't see the two distinct, elongated pressure points, they didn't exist. It was just an ache. A normal, mundane ache from a normal, mundane accident. She moved to the sink to brush her teeth, gripping the porcelain basin with both hands to steady herself. She looked into the mirror. The glass was old, dissilvered in patches, like calm water disturbed by oil. Her reflection looked pale, eyes hollowed out by the shadows of the room. Get a grip, Sam. You're the one who wanted to keep the house. She reached for her toothbrush, which she had set on the edge of the wide, marble vanity. Her hand stopped inches from the bristles. The vanity was coated in a thick layer of grey dust, undisturbed except for where she had placed her toiletries kit the night before. But to the left of her bag, in the thickest part of the grime, were marks. 2 long, serpentine trails had been dragged through the dust. They started at the edge of the mirror and stopped right where her hand was resting. They were impossibly slender, spaced wide apart. The dust at the end of the trails was still curling, unsettled, drifting in the stagnant air. Samantha froze, her heart skipping a beat before hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked at the mirror again. In the reflection, the door behind her, which she had definitely locked, was standing open a mere inch, revealing only absolute darkness beyond.